This week's Torah portion talks about the story of Korach and his rebellion that he led against Moses and Aaron, the two greatest leaders of all time. It split the Jewish community. And even after Korach and his assembly were punished, the community, the Jewish community, rallied against Moses and Aaron and said, "Who anointed you? Who appointed you? Why are you the leaders? And look what you've done. You killed the members of the tribe of Korach who stood up to protest and stand up for their rights and equality." And at that point, God said, okay, let each representative of each tribe take their staff, and Aaron shall take his staff as well, and everyone shall place it in the tent of meeting. And tomorrow morning you'll come back and you'll see my response. And sure enough, the next day when the Jewish people gathered, they returned to the tent of meeting, and miraculously the staff of Aaron had sprouted almonds. It grew almonds, and this was a clear sign from God that indeed Aaron was the selected leader to be the tribe of the priests, the ones who would lead the Jewish people. And the rabbis ask, why was the sign to prove the validity and the authority of Aaron the sprouting of almonds on the staff of Aaron? Why almonds? Why not pears or bananas or grapes? What was the symbolism of almonds? And here is something quite fascinating. Many people don't know this, but you could Google this and see for yourself. There are two different types of almonds. There's what we eat, which is sweet almonds, and then there's what's known as bitter almonds. And indeed, bitter almonds have toxicity and acid in it, and literally could be lethal. You can die by eating bitter almonds, and that is why it is illegal to sell bitter almonds in the United States of America. They could only be processed in certain ways to produce certain liquors and so on. But the almonds we eat are called sweet almonds. But have you ever taken an almond out of a bag and it's very small and you bite into it and it's very bitter? Here's the irony. Sweet almonds, when they start out, they're bitter. But when they develop fully, they become sweet. They start off bitter, but they end up sweet. Bitter almonds, which are lethal and dangerous, actually start out being sweet in the beginning, but end up being bitter. And here's what our rabbis teach us. The message of the almonds that the rabbis say the Torah was teaching us by God making Aaron's staff sprout into almonds is that the difference between peace and conflict is that conflict in the beginning could be exciting. People feel important, they feel needed, they rally behind the cause, they feel righteous that they're standing up for something, they feel important, egotistical, they feel like their voice is being heard, and people get involved and take sides and create conflict. And it starts off sweet. It's something to be passionate about and excited about. But then the long-term results are very, very bitter. The consequences are bitter and even lethal. On the other hand, peace takes painful compromise. It takes vulnerability and honesty. It takes sometimes painful concessions to make peace. But then ultimately it ends up being sweet. And that was the message of the almonds that sprouted on Aaron's staff. Always seek peace in life. Because yes, conflict may seem exciting in the beginning. It may seem like it's standing up for something that's a cause that you could rally behind. You feel self-righteous and everyone has an opinion and everyone has to be heard. It starts off sweet, but it ends up very bitter. On the other hand, peace starts off painful, but it ends up being very sweet. We're living through a time that we're seeing so much conflict, but we have to ask ourselves, what are the long-term repercussions going to be when we, God forbid, turn against each other? The long-term consequences are always negative. But when we make painful compromises, we sit down and learn to have dialogue and respect, and we do the hard work that's necessary, ultimately we will reap the sweetness. That was the eternal message of the story of almonds sprouting on Aaron's staff in this week's Torah portion. A lesson that we need to hear, especially during these days. I'll conclude with a story I heard from a Chabad rabbi who was on campus, and he brought his students to Crown Heights for a Shabbaton. There were thousands of students from hundreds of campuses, and when they arrived, there were lists of names of different students where they would be eating on Shabbat from different communities, in different homes, from different campuses. And a young girl by the name of Jennifer, who saw a name that was identical to her last name, spelled the same way, that was eating in a different home from a different university. She tracked this person down and started to talk to him to see if they were related, and was shocked to learn that this was actually her first cousin. Sadly, her father and his brother had gotten into a family feud, and they stopped talking to each other, and she had no connection. And here she was, a young lady in her 20s, her cousin was in his 20s, and they had never met before. They embraced, they hugged, they were so happy to meet each other. At that point, Jennifer said to the young man, her cousin, "I want you to know I'm getting married in 2 months' time. I want to invite you to my wedding." And her cousin said, "I can't come. My father will be so upset at me. He doesn't talk to your father. They're at odds with each other." But she insisted and said, "You know what? We're cousins. We should get to know each other. We need to heal this rift in the family." And sure enough, he agreed to come. Chabad Rabbi said he was at the wedding, and the grandmother was sitting in a wheelchair during the reception time. And suddenly he heard crying, wailing, weeping coming from the next room. He ran into the room, and there he saw the grandmother hugging and kissing her grandson, who she had never met before, having met him for the first time in her life at her own granddaughter's wedding. The joy and the cry, and the hugs and the kisses could not end. It was just pure, overwhelming joy. My friends, let us think long term, whether it's in our personal relationships, in our families, in our communities, or in our society as Americans. Let us remember, when the almonds start off sweet, it ends up being bitter. When it starts off being bitter, it ends up being sweet. The greatest blessing and the greatest sweetness in life is peace, shalom. However, in order to get there, we need to be willing to take the painful steps and measures necessary. We need to look at each other, speak to each other, understand each other, respect each other, and compromise with one another. Yes, it's difficult, but ultimately, it bears the sweetest fruit of all. Have a wonderful day.